Well, good morning, everybody. Congratulations on getting through the rain. It was, I know it's been kind of wet and soggy, and usually when we have rain like that, 90% of the people just skip it. So I'm very pleased and proud to see everybody here. Thank you for coming. My name is John Hamry. I'm the president here at CSIS, and my role is largely ornamental, to say welcome to all of you. I do want one kind of a safety announcement. We always do this when we have groups from the outside. We want to just say briefly, if we do hear an announcement, we've never had it happen in the 5 years we've been here, but if we do hear an announcement, Andrew is going to be responsible for you. We're going to exit through that door or this door. They'll both take us to the stairs that's right by that door. We'll go down to the alley. We'll take 2 left-hand turns and a right-hand turn, and we'll go over to National Geographic, and we'll assemble there. Now, they've got a great show right now at National Geographic. It's about the Titanic. People don't know that the Titanic, discovering the Titanic, was actually a cover story for a secret Navy mission. We had lost the Scorpion, a submarine. We wanted to find it, learn more about it, and so it was a cover story, if you can imagine. And after they had done all the finding the submarine, they spent 1 week and found the Titanic. It's a great show. It's a great show. I'll pay for the tickets if anything happens. If nothing happens, you pay for your own tickets, okay? But do go see it. We're delighted to have everybody here, and I want to say thank you to Alan Pellegrini and Thales for making it possible for us to do this study and have this conference with you today. And it's about artificial intelligence. Now, these are the most often spoken buzzwords that nobody knows anything about in Washington right now. I mean, if we go through phases like this, I remember when big data was the buzzword in Washington. And right now, artificial intelligence is kind of a buzzword. Everybody is thinking about it, and there's really not enough intellectual context to understand what we're talking about. And that's what this study is about. Andrew is going to, in a few minutes, give you kind of a background on the study that we're releasing today, a little video that's going to introduce it. But this is one of those very interesting questions where an enormous amount of momentum is moving all around us, and what are the governance issues associated with what we're discovering, and how are we going to manage it? These are open-ended questions for which we really don't have answers. The purpose of our conversation today is to lay out a framework a bit, and then to hear from 3 experts that are going to help us think about this in a more structured way. But before we turn to them, let me ask Alan to come up on the stage. I want to say thank you again for giving us this opportunity. Alan Pellegrini, please.
Hello, and thank you all for coming out. And thanks, John. We do sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and CSIS. So thanks very much. I just have a few minutes, so let me just make a couple points before we get on with the program. Thales, we're very proud to be a sponsor of this report and this event. I've had a chance to read an early draft of what you're about to see. I can tell you it is filled with what we would consider very important and very interesting insights into artificial intelligence and its impacts. I'd like to use the few minutes here to tell you why Thales felt that sponsoring this project was important, not just to us, but really to our entire industry. For those of you not familiar with us, we're a very large technology company, European-based, but with global footprint, especially here in the U.S. and North America. We serve 5 very large vertical markets. Space, we're a large provider of satellites and payloads, including with the space station, the International Space Station, aerospace, commercial and military aircraft, and air traffic management. Ground transportation, so if you ride the New York subway system or London Underground, you've had a chance to experience our products in action. Security, both cyber and physical security, such as airports. And of course, defense. We're one of the 10 largest defense providers on Earth. In each case, you can appreciate that we address some of the most challenging and complex problems that are faced. Those that really impact critical decisions and those that occur at the most sensitive times. So in other words, what we're involved with affects lives. Now, we recognized a handful of years ago that there are emerging technologies that will disrupt our businesses and our markets. And they include areas like big data analytics that John referred to, but also cybersecurity, Internet of Things, and especially artificial intelligence. And we as a company have made significant investments in each in order to try to stay in front for our businesses. In the case of artificial intelligence, we're already incorporating this technology to help us solve some important, what we would call use cases or specific problems. Just to give you one example, as a large collector of satellite imagery data, we now apply artificial intelligence to help decipher or make sense of satellite imagery to detect sensitive or perhaps threatening items among a very large set of imagery data. That's a perfect use case for artificial intelligence, as is things like airport security, where we're doing facial recognition to help detect potential threats. But given the nature and complexity of the problems we help solve and the nature of the customers we serve, our success is going to depend not just on technology, but on other topics. And we felt, to better understand the role of government in artificial intelligence, the issues such as AI reliability. You're going to hear about explainable AI and verification. These are especially important topics and critical for defense application. None of us wants to apply artificial intelligence to create the next Terminator, for example. And these are, in particular, very important topics. We need to better understand the hazards and risks. And most importantly, at Thales, we simply wanted to help shape the conversation around AI because we think it's important. We want to be part of a collective force for good and ethical applications of AI to really help address our world's most foundational challenges. And so with those objectives in mind, we embarked on this initiative, partnering with CSIS. We felt they would bring and could mobilize the best breadth and depth of strategic thinking and expertise to successfully address this topic at this stage. So from a Thales perspective, we look forward to this presentation and panel, and certainly to the continued engagement with CSIS and all of you. So we thank you for coming. And I thank you for the few minutes here this morning. Now we're going to see the brief video that John mentioned. I think it's about 3.5 minutes, and I think it'll provide you a good summary and some of the initial insights that you'll hear the panel expound upon shortly. So thank you very much.
Artificial intelligence is a uniquely complex field. We've thought about it for centuries, worked toward the modern version of it for over 60 years, and made significant breakthroughs, especially in machine learning, since 2012. Yet compared to what it could someday achieve for us, AI is only getting started. Like any emerging field, wise AI investors will spread their bets, hoping that a few pay off big enough to justify the rest. AI will deliver the greatest rewards to those prepared to make long-term investments. But investing in AI applications alone will not ensure results or success. The advanced capabilities of AI depend on a complex supportive system, an AI ecosystem. When properly executed, this enables AI to take root, develop, and improve on human performance. But a fully developed AI ecosystem, and the kinds of results that justify its expense, don't happen overnight. And in many cases, they don't happen at all. Most public and private organizations, including the Department of Defense, are woefully underinvested in the supportive structures that AI depends on. This creates a debt that must be paid up front to allow for successful AI adoption. Until it is tackled, the debt of an underdeveloped AI ecosystem will only grow, undermining long-term success. The smartest investors have begun to understand how this AI startup debt must be dealt with in their initial investments across the field. Since AI emerged as a practical reality in the past decade, the private sector has dominated AI investment. Tech companies are perfecting the painstaking process that made famous leaps like AlphaGo and Watson possible. Meanwhile, commercial adopters have begun to think critically about what can make their AI applications worthwhile long-term. Many have seen the consequences of ignoring deficits in the AI ecosystem and have allocated their resources accordingly. Most government AI adopters start out far more underinvested than commercial users. The Department of Defense exemplifies this issue. If the nation's strategic goals for AI are to be realized, investing in the AI ecosystem must be a top priority. This investment will also lay the groundwork for wider government adoption of AI. While they can, and do, leverage commercial AI for strategic uses, there are some areas where commercial developers will not invest. The technology required to deliver and verify AI results for national security applications differs from what is expected from commercial AI. It must operate in specialized, high-risk areas and be extremely secure, assured, reliable, and explainable. Verification and validation are essential for these systems. Development of this technology is vital to the national interest and must be fast-tracked. By doing this, the government can also make a critical difference to AI in the wider commercial market. This public sector development could yield vital breakthroughs in the field. A viable national strategy for artificial intelligence would require investing in the AI ecosystem to pay down debt, especially in the workforce, and spreading bets across the AI field. For the public sector, it will be critical to focus on AI reliability. If the government works closely with the commercial sector to drive the technology forward, the U.S. can leverage AI to achieve its strategic objectives. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming today. And John opened by saying he was ornamental, and I'm here to tell you I think I may be a little redundant because we tried to pack as much of our report major findings as we could into that video, which you've just seen. I hope you enjoyed it, and it'll be out there on the web, on our website, on YouTube, Vimeo, and possibly a couple of other outlets for those who want to follow up and watch it again. But I am going to briefly run you through the very top-level findings of our report. There's a lot more there. It's about a 78-page report, so I encourage everyone, if you didn't get a copy on your way in, if we ran out of those, which we may have based on the size of the crowd, there'll be more available through the website shortly. So let me give you that top-level overview. I did want to start by thanking again Thales for their support for this project. I also want to thank Lindsay Shepard, who was the lead author on the report and really the engine behind the project, and our two other contributing authors, Robert and Leonardo, who worked very hard to put this report together and make it look good and sound good and actually have good thoughts in it. And I also want to thank the attendees at our many workshops on this project. We had 6 workshops. There was a hard core of about 20 folks who came to most of them, if not all of them. Another group of 10 to 15 who came for some of the sessions. None of the errors of this report are their fault. I hesitate to say that. They can disown every aspect of it, but their insights were deeply valuable to us as we went through this project. Okay. No? Okay. So John touched on the fact that one of the foundational questions when you're going to do an AI study is to start with a question of what are you actually talking about when it comes to artificial intelligence. And you know, it can be a kind of a meaningless term depending on the level of knowledge of the person talking about it and the problem that they're trying to bring illumination to. There's a lot of good work being done out there on artificial intelligence. So I want to begin by saying we've defined it in a specific way for this report, not because we want to criticize or critique anyone else's definition, but because we needed to have an understanding of what our scope was to do a useful project. Our project focused on what a lot of folks refer to as narrow AI. So we didn't try to get into questions of general artificial intelligence and the issues and the problems that that causes, largely because our time frame was relatively near-term focused, the next 5 to 10 years, and our judgment is that during that time frame, the issues of narrow AI are very much going to dominate how this field develops and the significance that it has for people trying to implement AI solutions and for government actors trying to understand the technology and capitalize on the technology. And so by narrow AI means artificial intelligence is a technology that does problem-specific, task-dependent solutions to cognitive problems. The way that AI operates is very different in many ways from what we would normally think of as human intelligence. The kind of problem solving that a lot of these algorithms engage in bears little to no resemblance to what we would think of as human cognition. So it is, as we've looked at it here, the various AI technologies within the AI field that were of greatest concern to us are not things that are trying to mimic human intelligence, but simply trying to perform tasks and solve problems in whatever way they can do. We also had, this study was a fairly broad look. So we looked at issues of AI investment, we looked at issues of AI adoption, issues of AI management, and did a bit of a survey of international activity in AI. So it was a very broad study, and I think there'd be a lot to be gained by going in deeper on each of these topics. And so what you'll see here is the highlights, in some ways, of the highlights, because it's a very broad look. All right, so one of the things we tried to do with our first effort was to come up with some kind of conceptual framework of understanding the arc of AI, if you will. How does progress in the AI field happen? How is it likely to proceed? And there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. There's increasing degrees of autonomy in AI systems. There's increasing degrees of collaboration in the way that AI operates that leads to higher order effects, higher order applications of AI over time, we hope. And so we tried to kind of capture that in a framework that we could visualize. And as you see along the bottom, we look at AI capability starting with the very narrowest possible tasks, like a telephone switchboard, which is just trying to move communication between two channels or two users in an intelligent and accurate way, and connecting the right people at the right time, and then building up towards broader and broader and more general purpose tasks over time. And in some cases, you can think of that, one temptation is to think of it purely in terms of the AI acting entirely on its own, and becoming increasingly autonomous, but that's not the only path, and it may not be, for some defense applications, the most important path, because as you've heard a lot of senior leaders in the Department of Defense articulate, we are not at a point now where anyone is willing to sign up for completely autonomous activation of many critical defense missions. There needs to be a human in the loop. So one of the other dimensions is, how does that AI take in the context of the problem of the world in which it's operating, of other actors, human actors, other AI actors that may be opponents, they may be collaborators in the process. And so the exposure of the ability of the AI to kind of move up through this hierarchy of behaviors, becoming more interactive, more collaborative, and then ultimately more able to act in a closer approximation of how a human-based intelligent actor would act over time. There's a lot more discussion of this in the report. I encourage you to go into it. But in terms of how it informed our later work, I would say we tried not to be overly focused on the increasing levels of autonomy as the only dimension of AI progress. And what you will see is, and we have a disconnect on this chart, you'll see, there's a long way to go. If we were to sort of do a non-disconnected chart out to some of the applications that at least have been speculated about, you would see that we're still very much in the early stages of AI development. There's a long way to go to get to some of the more advanced applications that have been discussed and imagined. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do. Just a second. Okay, I wanted to revisit this chart on the importance of the AI ecosystem. If there's nothing else, we want you to walk out of this room thinking about this report. It's about the importance of the AI ecosystem. This was our biggest takeaway, which is that for all of the importance of the different ways of implementing AI technology through machine learning, computer vision, other elements of the field, there is something fundamental that gets at how this works, how it can be usefully implemented and managed over time. And it's this collection of things that we have termed the AI ecosystem. That's people. It's the workforce, the technical workforce that is developing, but also engaging, managing, and using the AI technology. You see our little lock symbol here. It's the ability to secure the data on which the AI operates. It's the foundational piece of the tool. Being able to secure it, also being able to work on gathering data quality, and those issues. It's the ability to have a network, having the computing power to process the data and a network to share data so that the critical applications get the data they need when they need it, are able to do the training, but then also able to do their mission-specific tasks. It's the policies required to actually manage AI. There's a lot of work to be done there. There's a very good report put out earlier this year, by our Strategic Technologies program, which looked a lot at policy issues and strategy for AI, and I commend that to everyone, particularly on that topic, although they touched on a lot of things that we looked at as well. And then last but not least, the ability to verify and validate what AI tools actually do, and particularly for government users, high consequence and high consequence missions, many of which we see at the Department of Defense. The ability to actually validate the performance of AI as it grows and evolves is not only critical, but incredibly challenging. In other words, we don't know how to do that at this point in time, and I think we'll hear more about that in the panel discussion. Okay, I said we looked a little bit at AI investment, and I want to also give credit here. We leaned heavily on data gathered by McKinsey, who had a very good report on AI investment. Also some work done by Govini that looked at AI in the federal government space and where it lies. And then there's a great report called AI for the American People that the White House put out that summarizes some of the White House investment. Some of the takeaways there is very rapid growth in AI investment starting in about 2010 and really starting to skyrocket in 2012 as the curve really went vertical, driven a lot by machine learning and the takeoff of machine learning as a technique for AI that was delivering very important, significant results. In 2016, you see that companies across the space, inclusive of private equity, companies investing internally, of about $26 to $39 billion of investment. We also see that in terms of government investment, looking at the broadest possible category, which is NIT, networking and information technology, research and development, it's about $4.5 billion over per year from 2016, 2017, 2018 on average. So there's a lot of money going into this. Now, I mentioned that it was a very broad category. So one of the debates you can get wrapped up in AI is what constitutes a real AI. We have somewhat sidestepped that debate because our argument is the importance of the AI ecosystem means that in many ways an investment in a critical computing capability or critical networking is so foundational and so supportive of what you need within the AI ecosystem that it's worth considering that as an AI-related investment. So we haven't tried to split hairs here and say what is specifically AI, what's an algorithmic investment that isn't AI because it doesn't meet some criteria. We have chosen not to get into that kind of fine distinction making because we think the categorical look here is important. We also looked at AI adoption. What does it take? What does a user really want to know or need to know need to have in order to make effective implementation of AI. And we try to do a bit of a survey of where you see AI being implemented. I mentioned that in the commercial space, obviously machine learning has taken off in a big way. We see AI in the financial industry, in the insurance industry, in the advertising industry in a big way, especially online. And on the government side, and I should say in terms of self-driving vehicles, that's another huge area of commercial investment that's driving the field forward. On the government side, there's actually also quite a bit of AI progress or effort, forward momentum on AI going on. We see this with image recognition, with logistics applications, with unmanned applications. So Project Maven is a relatively well-known government effort, the scope of which has made a lot of progress in recent years and has gotten significant investment, leadership interest. The Sea Hunter unmanned surface vessel has likewise been driving the field forward on the government side. And there's been some pretty innovative work done in the Marine Corps on the logistics side to try and capitalize on AI, and also within the F-35 program in the logistics area, some incorporation of AI that we see taking place. For us, one of the big things that jumped out as we talked through AI adoption was the significant debts, the startup debts that have to be dealt with. This chart says technical debt at the top. It should say technical debt and workforce debt, because we want to emphasize that the debt is at least as much and possibly more so on the workforce side as it is on kind of the networking and computer infrastructure and data housing and data collection side. Because without the workforce, you really have very little to work with. You can gather the data. It's not as easy as maybe just saying you can gather the data, but there's a tremendous amount of data in government systems. There's a lot of work to be done in making sure that that's quality data, useful data, and it's really the workforce that has to do that work. But when we get into AI adoption, what we heard over and over again from our experts is this issue of the startup debt that people trying to implement AI face is the biggest issue that's out there. The specifics of the technology are not right now what is holding the field back. It is this startup debt. And again, we've tried to incorporate that into the idea of the AI ecosystem, that there's sort of debts to be paid across all aspects of the AI ecosystem. And that's what we hope will be the major takeaway of our look at this effort. We also had a session looking specifically about, well, if we really have AI in hand and we're starting to use it, what are the issues associated with actually managing that usage? If you think of AI, and I would say we primarily didn't think of AI as a general intelligence entity, but if you think of AI as a unit of application, to use some DoD terminology within the force, how would you kind of command and control that force? What are the issues that would come up with really using that to achieve missions in a real tactical, operational context? And what we discovered is that there are issues at the tactical level for how you use AI, very much tied to the workforce, but also at the operational level, middle manager level, where a lack of familiarity or understanding of AI can completely stymie the ability to use these tools and frustrate the tactical folks who may be young and innovative and able to embrace and grasp this technology. But if they can't get the resources and support from their next level up of management, they can be completely stymied in their ability to execute. And then the strategic level, broad organizational level policies in the DoD context, DoD policies, procedures, guidelines, and legal things. Some of the things that came out on that side is a lot of work to be done on understanding intellectual property and the significance and ownership and licensing of intellectual property in an AI context. When you have algorithms generating intellectual property, how does the management and ownership of that manifest? A tremendous amount of work to be done at each of these levels to really make AI useful for especially for high consequence missions. And then trust, reliability, and security, something that was hit hard in the video. But for an operational user of AI to truly put that into a high consequence scenario, understanding how it operates, what it's doing, why it's doing what it's doing, and how do we know it's going to do it in the way we expect, or at least in a safe way over time. And lastly, the study looked at some of the international activity in AI. Obviously, this has gotten a lot of attention. We dig into it in some detail across a survey of countries. I don't want to run you through a death march of all of them. China obviously stands out as a huge investor here. Russia as well. One thing we did, major takeaways from our international look is that the numbers of countries that are making significant efforts on AI is vast. It is truly a global competition that's going on out there. The Chinese are heavily committed, as are others. What these countries are seeking to do with AI varies very much. There is almost as much of an idea about different ways of using AI to promote national interests as you go across, as there are countries engaged in doing it. Again, here we return to the importance of the AI ecosystem, because from a global competitive aspect, I walk away from this study not so much concerned that there's going to be a specific technology developed in China or in Russia that is going to give them some indomitable advantage that will take them out ahead of the US or others in the world, or vice versa, as much as the robustness of that AI ecosystem will be what confers advantage over the longer term for countries engaged in work on AI. And then on recommendations, again, refer you to the report for the full list. We think issues of AI trust and security are critical areas for U.S. government investment. The degree for which this is required for high consequence government missions is in excess, I think, of where the field on its own will be able to go. There's critical need for investment here. Particularly, as I said, on verification and validation, where there's a lot of theoretical work to be done to understand how is this even possible, because AI challenges some of our traditional methods of doing test and verification and validation. I've hit already our point about the workforce, the criticality of developing, nurturing the workforce, having access to the workforce, being able to get the workforce into the organization. There is a lot that commercial industry is going to do in AI development. They will take the lead. But if we think that we can usefully use AI for government missions without AI-skilled personnel in the government, we're kidding ourselves. We need this talent organically as well as out there in the private sector where a lot of the bulk of the investment will be happening. The importance of the digital capability. And although there are some strengths in the government's digital capability, which you see reflected in some of the early adopters in government of AI technology, such as the intelligence community, where there have been significant investments made over a series of years in the digital capability, there's still a tremendous amount that needs to be done on the government side. And then lastly, on policies, and being able to, number one, manage and safely use AI in government context, in terms of cooperating with the private sector, successful acquisition of software, which AI fundamentally is, a lot of work to be done here. And so I'll leave our slide up on the AI ecosystem, the importance, to try and hammer that home. And that concludes our broad overview of our findings and recommendations. And I want to turn now to our panel, who are going to join me up here on the podium. I will let you know up front, we did have 4 panelists lined up for today's discussion. Unfortunately, Drew, our representative from IBM, was flying down this morning, and his flight was delayed and possibly not even going to take off. So unless he comes in graduate style in the back of the room and hammers on the glass, I don't think he'll be able to join us today. But we do have, I think, a fine set of panelists, and I'm going to join them now at the table. All right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today for the discussion. I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we'll move into it. To my left is Ryan Lewis, who is the Vice President of Cosmic Works, which is an In-Q-Tel lab dedicated to helping U.S. national security agencies, commercial organizations, academia, and nonprofits leverage emerging remote sensing capabilities and recent advances in machine learning technologies, particularly computer vision. Thank you for joining us, Ryan. To his left is Aaron Hawley, who is Vice President of Public Sector at DataRobot. which is a company that in the artificial intelligence business, using artificial intelligence on data. She can tell you more about how that works. She works closely with federal government users. They also have a very substantial commercial business as well, using their AI to draw insights from large volumes of data. And to her left is David Sparrow. David is a researcher at the Institute for Defense Analyses. Both David and Aaron were regular attendees at our workshops. I want to thank them for that. David has a PhD in physics from MIT. He spent 12 years as an academic physicist and then joined IDA in 1986. He's concentrated a lot of his work on technology insertion in ground combat platforms, and recently has gone on a deep dive on the challenges of autonomous systems, technological maturity and intelligence machines, and on test, evaluation, verification, and validation of autonomous systems driven by artificial intelligence. So, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start by giving each of our panelists just an opportunity to give a few thoughts. First of all, or on your kind of perception of AI challenges. If you have reactions to the report, that's great, as long as they're good. Now, we're looking for all kinds of feedback, and then we'll get into some more specific questions as we go. But Ryan, why don't we start with you?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. And I had the opportunity to read the report over the weekend, and I loved all 78 pages of it. So. But as as mentioned, In-Q-Tel serves as a strategic investor for the U.S. intelligence community, and within the labs, we go one step further and focus on applied research projects, and that offers us sort of a unique perspective in terms of what's not just happening within the artificial intelligence market, in terms of both incumbent activity as well as startups. But also in terms of what some would argue is the leading edge that's coming out of academia or other national laboratories. And I think when we compile all of our experiences into one, I think perhaps the simplest way to surmise what we're seeing in the market today is simply that AI in its general sense serves as a fundamental chance for the intelligence community and the military to rethink some of their applications and processes. And the key question, or the key word there, is that it offers. As mentioned, a lot of these technologies are in their very early stages with some very exciting and tractable results, but there's still much work to be done. And I think for us, that opens up a perspective in terms of how we think about implications, both near-term and long-term, for this type of technology. And it's important to kind of set the stage, because that comment is in kind of stark contrast with all the hype that we hear around AI in general. And just by show of hands, how many people here have heard of Computer Vision Pattern Recognition Conference, otherwise known as CVPR? I know a couple people have, right? So if you haven't heard of that conference sold out faster than Capitals playoff tickets. And that should be startling to all of us in some ways, because the question is why? Why are people so excited about going to a conference that just a few years ago was not well heard of? And the reason is because for researchers, they are just now having the opportunity to present very tractable results in very niche focus areas that are now maybe expanding beyond that niche. And so when we think about implications from the national security perspective, what that means is how can we harness some of that excitement? You know, we highlighted at the macro level, I think it's well put in the report, how do we start to design the infrastructure for the ecosystem? But more generally, I think for us, as we look at specific applications, one of our core parts, and I think you hit it well, is what are the human-machine teaming interface? What does that look like? In some cases, whether it's an end user just using different analytic tools, specifically DataRobot, or if it is a scientist that's building their own models, what are our expectations for those employees, and what do we anticipate the life cycle for those tools to be. It's a completely different way of thinking about a problem from a workforce perspective. And then the other piece, from a sort of an applications view, is that these technologies, we're still in experimental stages, which can be at times very frustrating, as my colleagues will tell you. But what isn't frustrating, what's really cool is that it allows us now in these early days to begin to figure out what processes we want to change and which ones that we think are strong. Hard to believe deep learning isn't a solution to everything. I know that's sacrilege in some areas, but it's important to know when should these tools be applied and when they shouldn't. And I think as we go through some of the questions, we can highlight examples for us. But I think the core takeaway is these technologies allow for early experimentation, which could have drastic effects in certain applications or processes. It may only be tertiary in others.
All right. Next up is Aaron, and I should say, because I want to make sure we're not really misunderstood, we are talking about a broad overarching problem for government and making AI effective and useful. There are companies out there doing really good stuff with it, and Aaron works for one. And so we're not trying to say that no one out there is doing really useful stuff with AI today. They are, but there is this larger systemic issue. But Aaron, you can lead us with some more insights on that.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you so much. We're thrilled to be here today. So DataRobot is a company that back in about 2012, our CEO was working in an insurance industry, and he is a data scientist. And many data scientists who are currently working at Facebook and Google and Amazon and those places, they're spending weeks to months to really develop some of the strongest algorithms in the world in order to help predict some of the things that could happen in their business place. So our CEO thought to himself that there's this competition called the Kaggle competition, and every data scientist or data analyst who was interested in partaking in these contests, whether they were from Allstate or Netflix on a certain challenge, they realized that even if they worked for this insurance company, he and his partner, they thought it takes us weeks and months to actually develop out a single algorithm. And that's just too long. We are going to be beaten day in and day out by China and Russia's advances and what they're trying to accomplish if we don't try to take a step ahead. So in 2012, thanks to In-Q-Tel as well with their investment, DataRobot was formed, and the idea behind it was we need to make a software platform where we take what the best pieces of what data scientists bring to the table, which is a combination of having really strong domain expertise as well as a really great background in computer science, and then the third piece being very strong mathematicians, statisticians. How do we bring that together in a software platform so that rather than it taking weeks to months to answer a single question about something that you need to have information for your business, let's develop a software platform so that instead of being limited to a single algorithm, we offer chances for people to put their data in and to be able to generate out hundreds of different models within a few minutes versus weeks or months, which we just don't have the time to do anymore. So the folks that we have in our organization, we took 3 years, the investments that we have across the VC community, we took the first 3 years, and instead of putting a product out to market within 6 months, the executive team, we decided we were going to take those 3 years and $30 million in order to make sure that we built the strongest platform, which is what we view as automated machine learning. And we are under the umbrella of artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, deep learning. There's a variety of different things you'll hear about. Our focus is on automating the machine learning process. And in doing that, it's fascinating some of the things that we've been able to do, especially in the commercial industry. I started the federal public sector team about 2 years ago, and we're seeing some really nice ways to get started for both the military and the intelligence community. But in commercial, it's really outstanding to see what we are able to do to help across a variety of different markets, including banking. You know, anti-money laundering is one of the biggest risks to our financial and our economic future. And the fact that we are able to identify anti-money laundering schemes and help stop them before they get started has saved banks and ultimately those of us who are consumers hundreds of millions of dollars in just a short time frame. So I think from a DataRobot perspective, what we're trying to do is help people understand how can you, most people in this room will say, if you ask especially a federal agency, how many people are truly data scientists in your organization? You might find one or you might find two within a massive organization who are dealing with volumes of data. But if you actually look back to it and you actually deploy capabilities like ours, we can help take your 1 or 2 data scientists and allow them to really take all of that massive amounts of data and make some solid, good answers and solutions for you. And that's what we've been able to do here in the public sector space, and what we're seeing happening day in and day out in the commercial industry.
Thanks. David.
So both from the perspective of building these tools and making the investments, this is very much in keeping with the ecosystem approach. And I'm going to bring it way down to, let me call it a clarification level. So first of all, I'm delighted to be here. This is a real treat for me. Andrew said something about my window into this. It's from an evaluation perspective on usually the entry to AI is as an element in a full-up system of some sort, either technology maturity assessments or test evaluation, verification, validation. But I went through, prior to getting the report and reading, I said, so what would I say just sort of on my own? Largely consonant, but I'll try to compare. So one of our mantras or sound bites at our place is AI is not a thing. Now, Andrew's report says it's a buzzword, but it's not even a technology or a set of technologies. It refers to everything from mathematical research and provability of software to aspirations for the good of society. And it's important to keep reminding yourself that you can't do anything with anything that broad. You have to narrow it down, just like they did in the report. What we mean is purpose-built algorithms, but you also have to not lose sight of the bigger issue if you want to actually have the piece parts build you the ecosystem. The second point I would like to make, which is largely overlooked, is we don't have anything like a predictive theory here. We're doing very useful things, and there's very profound work on theoretical underpinnings, but we're not there yet. And this has implications across the board. It has implications for how you want to do development, implications for TEV&V. It has actually legal and ethical implications. And I would class the need for a predictive theory as part of the technical debt that has to be paid down. Now, you can do very, very useful things without a predictive theory. I mean, part of what happens if you work on ground combat is you work on artillery systems. And we had useful artillery systems when we still thought heat was a fluid called phlogiston, and 100 years before the periodic chart of the elements, which told us about where energetic materials got there from. So there can still be tremendous utility, but there can be much more utility. And I would point out that in the artillery business, when they were still thinking about phlogiston and didn't know what the periodic chart was, they had a lot of accents. Which gets me to point number 3, which is about risk. I like to think about risk in terms of 2 different types of things that have gotten a lot of attention. One is the AlphaGo triumphs, and the other is the self-driving cars. AlphaGo is not going to hurt anybody. There are no severe consequences. There's no downside risk, and that is incredibly freeing for the developers. It simplifies the verification and validation, because if you get something that you have to validate, which is really hard to validate, you don't care. Nothing bad's going to happen. Absolutely different situation in self-driving cars. Very bad things can happen. They already have happened. And if catastrophic failures are possible, the rare and catastrophic events have to be understood. It's going to be even more severe in the defense regime than in the self-driving cars. And this links then, of course, to the underlying predictive theory. To go back to the artillery business, you understand energetic materials, you understand aerodynamics, you know approximately where the risks are going to be when you do something new. And this can focus your development, it can focus your test and evaluation. It allows you to have a basis for the legal and ethical and liability issues. The last, not the last, it's no danger, I'm done yet. The human-machine interaction was the next one I wanted to talk about. And we've been thinking about this with stolen technology, but stolen terminology. I've forgotten who we've stolen it from, where we are evolving from a human-machine user-tool relationship to a peer-to-peer relationship. And the report talks about shifting workload from the human to the machine. But I think when you do that, and aspirationally, one of the things we want to do is we actually want to shift responsibility from the human to the machine. And this is going to be important in very, very many ways, particularly for defense, because what it's going to do is it's going to impose a need for experimentation that hasn't been done before. We don't actually know how it's going to work out as we shift the boundaries of responsibility, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation that has to be done. This is already going on in the self-driving car regime. In a certain sense, at least what Tesla is doing is that they are beta testing their software with real cars that are driving around on the road. Now, let's put the scale on this. So first of all, recall Tesla gets beat up for their low production, the fact that they have had trouble, gearing up for production, which means they've made 100,000 of these vehicles and they've hit as high as 5,000 in a single day. Now, switch from that to the Department of Defense. The biggest platform program we have at the moment is the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. At no point do they expect to make 5,000 in a year. So you are in a completely different regime, a completely different learning regime from what you're doing with your fielding. You're going to have to front-end load experimentation if you're operating in that kind of space in a way that the commercial sector, which thinks in terms of millions, doesn't have to. The fifth thing I was thinking about was data, and I promised Dr. Hamry, but coming out of the research area in physics, this is an area which has an underlying theory, and you still have to have 90% of your money and 80% of your people doing the data part. However hard you think data is, it's probably harder than that. I want to close with two other comments. The report labels this area as semantically problematic, which I don't disagree with. And I have two semantic issues to raise. Very, very commonly in the community, and I think the report lapses into it in a couple of places, is trust is treated as an unalloyed good. Trusting things that aren't working is not an alloyed good. The psychology field has the term of calibrated trust, and it is important to keep reminding yourself that trust going up is not necessarily a good thing. Trust going up to exactly the right place where you trust it, you know what missions in what environments this system will perform well in, but you also know what ones it will not perform in is critical. And it is routine I think it's probably a part of human nature, that people assume the system's going to work, and therefore what you want to do is trust it. Well, no system works perfectly everywhere. So the idea of calibrated trust as opposed to freestanding trust is important. And the other has to do with explainability and transparency, and we would add instrumentation for this. One of the things that you're going to need to do to build the theory is to be able to instrument a look into the decision-making processes of these AI systems. This also very, very frequently gets treated as, well, once we can explain it, it will work, people will trust it, it will be adopted. But one of my favorite lines from the thing is, explainability is not a panacea. There's a lot of things that people might explain to you which would actually cause you to reject rather than endorse their positions. So with that, again, I'm delighted and honored to be here, and I think my turn's up.
Thanks, David. All All right, well, I've got a handful of questions I'm going to throw at the panel to try and drive some discussion, and then we'll open up for audience questions after that. I want to start with what I consider some of the unfinished work of our project. There's still a lot more to be done. We kind of started our project with the perspective of if we looked at how AI was actually being used in reality in the commercial space and in the government space, it would give us a lot of insight into the areas where progress was going to grow fastest. And I still think there's a lot to that, but honestly, it was a little bit frustrating trying to do that. One of my a priori assumptions before really digging too deeply into this project was that AI was going to be really good and really useful at doing things that humans really struggle with. One thing humans really struggle with is making decisions in microseconds. And you see the need for that in some defense applications. I'm thinking of missile defense and some other areas. Another thing humans struggle with is dealing with absolutely vast, unknowable millions of data point sets of knowledge. And we do see AI making a substantial contribution on that volume question. My own perspective is we don't see AI lending as much assistance yet on these really time-critical kinds of things. You see it in the commercial sector in terms of the financial industry, but in terms of defense, not so much, because it turns out that a lot of these really time-critical things are also really high-consequence things, and we run into this problem that we don't really understand how these algorithms achieve the solutions they're after, and we're not highly confident that they're going to make the right call. So there's a lot of areas where you would think that we're going to make rapid progress in AI, but when we look at what's going on, not so much, or not as much as you might expect. So I want to challenge the panel in terms of the contribution that you see AI making in national security missions in the next 5 to 10 years, and what do you think kind of explains why that's where the focus or the momentum is most likely to be in the near term? Why don't you start?
All right, so obviously In-Q-Tel invests across a lot of different areas, and within our labs, we have labs that focus on everything from audio data to cybersecurity. Selfishly, being a group that is focused on geospatial, I'm inclined to kind of focus more towards a geospatial application, mainly focused on computer vision. But I think from our experience so far, we do see in the next 5 to 10 years these sorts of technologies that have a fundamental impact on what in the industry is called sort of the TCPAD process, sort of tasking, collection, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. And what we mean by that is that it's no longer just a process about finding things in an image and then reporting that out. But these technologies offer, albeit very early stage, offer a chance to quantify and systematically explore each part of that chain. So going to the beginning part with the tasking piece, do we know what we're asking for specifically? Do we know what has a high enough value? If we think about it from an artificial intelligence perspective, think about a machine learning model, and you want to find buildings. Or building footprints is something that we focus on a lot. You would want to know early on, what sort of resolution do you need? What sort of spectral coverage do you need? And also, what sort of temporal collections do you need? It's different. It's one thing to ask a person that, who has looked at this particular application for years. It's another to have specific models tuned for those different types of data. And that's, for us, is really exciting. I think one of the ways that we've tried to explore this with industry and with the government is an initiative that we've launched in coordination with Digital Globe and Radiant Solutions, and then with hosting services from Amazon Web Services called SpaceNet, which is modeled after ImageNet. And the intent there is that we have open sourced a large amount of curated data, and I can completely agree with David's comment. The data curation piece is the most painful part. We host machine learning competitions, and then we also work with others to post open source tools from that data set. And I think one of the things that we've been continuously surprised upon with every competition and every data set that we release is that some of our assumptions are always challenged. What we think makes the most logical sense isn't always the case depending on the model. Or what's even more exciting and sometimes frustrating is that the results will vary greatly between different models. We recently just released a blog post that highlighted just the difference in machine learning performance between the same image, essentially, but at different nadir angles. So looking at building footprint detection from one angle, and then at the exact same nadir angle, just on the other side, but you're going to have a shadow effect now, performance varies greatly. And these are just, this is very subtle. This is one input, so you're looking for building footprints in one resolution type, and you have two different images and of the same area, and yet your performance is very different. Just extrapolate that with more sources, greater search area. It's these sorts of things that we want to explore across each part of the chain. So when we think about long-term implications in the geospatial domain for something like AI, it's allowing us to say what is most valuable for this specific problem, and does it help us answer the question in the most impactful way. And from our view, whether you're a startup or you're an incumbent providing services, what is kind of most compelling right now is still being in this experimentation stage to figure out what's best, what isn't. There's a lot of lessons learned that will serve, whether we know it or not, will probably serve as a foundation for a lot of our decision making going forward. I think the one thing, a couple of things that we would highlight though that are critical to shape that outcome is, one of the first of which is, we already mentioned data, and that's, I won't sort of belabor that point, but when we think about key applications in the national security environment, think of a specific question that we want, whether it's foundational mapping or finding a very specific object. Having a strategic focus and dedicated focus around building a core data set, that is a non-trivial task. And ask anyone on our team or anyone on our investment team, and they'll tell you, step one, whether you're building a core data set from real life information or trying to use synthetic information, that is a critical first step. One of the other things that we've seen, without getting too much in the nuts and bolts, is focusing on core tools and some standardization of data formats. Just being able to search across different file formats to say what is in this image is still a very tough task. If you look at Amazon's open data repository, which is really rich in terms of mostly government provided satellite data from NASA and from NOAA, and our SpaceNet data is also hosted there. Right now, one cannot seamlessly search across all those different repositories to say, I want an image of Atlanta, Georgia, which is where one of our competition's cities currently for SpaceNet. The fact that an end user can't do that means that right out of the gate, an analyst or an end user, regardless of their technical skill, is going to have to step through multiple functions just to put a data set together, to then start answering questions or use tools or then figure out which models. So if we think about what's key, whether it be data sets or tool standardization, or just having some basic evaluation metrics that we agree upon for certain questions, the core focus should be around how can we have sort of these fundamental building blocks that we can start asking more complex questions and then have even more complex analytical techniques as things mature.
Aaron.
Thank you. So I would agree on the geospatial side, an example of something that we've been able to work with right now, and you think that the government's not as far ahead as they are, but there are certain areas, specifically within the DoD and the IC, where I think that we are seeing some really interesting application. One would be in the idea of the geospatial. So for instance, we have a lot of information about ISIL holdouts as an example. So we've been able to take that data, and if you understand historically, because machine learning is about two things, about training the model and then actually scoring or predicting on whatever it is, that model that you choose. And so in a geospatial example, we were able to take ISIL holdout locations that we knew about historically in order to help protect the warfighter and to be able to identify future ISIL holdouts. Well, we might not have been able to do that if we hadn't had collected this information and built out machine learning models so that we could more accurately predict where a warfighter might be going that might be a sensitive area to go. And that information is available to us. The government has massive amounts of data available. Historically, we need to use that data and build out really strong machine learning models. As far as more applications that we can see now and in the next 5 to 10 years, I know for me, this is a hot button for me, but the fact that there's a queue of 740,000 people waiting for security clearance is mind-boggling to me. So why is it that Indeed.com, which is the world's largest search engine, if we were all applying for a job right now, we would probably go to the internet. If you go to Indeed, your resume is filtered through. It's quickly mined for the information that's gathered from it, and they're able to quickly identify organizations that are the best fit for you. They also throw out the resumes that do not make sense for that organization. So why is that same application not being used in something as critical as national security and clearances? You could still bring in, there's 3 areas that you could work in. You could bring in all of the applications, and immediately those that have not been in the past, you're using historical, those that have not been thrown out immediately make a good indicator of the current applications as they're coming through of folks who we might want to go ahead and say, we don't need to have a senior investigator work as much time on these. These 740,000, there's at least 200,000 that are good citizens. They have not been arrested. They're not at risk. We take that same idea with those applications that do need to be spent and have more information identified in them where your investigators would spend a greater amount of time. We should not have a queue of 740,000 applications when commercial today is able to do what they're doing across the board with machine learning. We also see it within fraud. We in the commercial industry and our customers today are shaving off tens of millions of dollars by being able to identify fraudulent claims the minute that they come in the door because of being able to use machine learning and artificial intelligence in their process. That same idea could be involved inside of like a Medicare or Medicaid environment. And lastly, an example that is going on right now is something that we're very proud of with Homeland Security. They're very, very definitely addressing how can they bring in artificial intelligence in certain areas. And an example would be better safety and passenger security. So there's a program, GTAS, the Global Travel Assessment Screening System, which we are a part of. And being able to identify high-risk passengers based on machine learning has been something that we've been working on with them for just the past, I'd say 6 to 9 months, and the results are pretty outstanding. And we're going to be able to share that information with those countries that don't have the capabilities that perhaps the United States government does, so that we can provide those same models so that we can make sure that passenger screening globally is more easily benefits the world. I think in general, what we're able to see in the next 5 to 10 years is across a variety of spectrums. But I think that there's this big fear. Most of the agencies we talk to think that they have to have all of their data ready to go today. That's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So instead of trying to boil the ocean, take data that you historically have information on, being able to build out strong models within minutes instead of weeks and months, and then being able to go out and make some good, strong, accurate predictions is something that's absolutely relevant and available to do today. And that's what we're seeing some of our agencies doing. Across commercial, we have thousands of use cases. But I think federal, we can see more if we kind of grasp some of those.
David?
So I have a narrower interpretation of the question. I think the obvious area in which the microseconds matters is cybersecurity. I think that's not just a national security issue, it's a national economic security issue, and then that feeds back into the national security as well. The industrial espionage is a substantial threat to national well-being. I think there is a belief that this kind of rapid timescale thing can also work in combat situations in electronic warfare. I'm not sure we're quite as ready to that, partly because that goes back to this issue of when are we going to be ready for the human in the loop? And I would add a cautionary remark about that back to related to your section about managing artificial intelligence. There's a whole lot of managing of artificial intelligence which is lost because of decisions made by 23-year-old programmers in the middle of the night who have not been in the strategy meetings and are making decisions embedded deeply in code, often based on tacit assumptions. And there's an issue there, which I think ties back to the experimentation issue. There's an issue there of how you get coherence from top to bottom, because it's even harder in these software-dominated things than in hardware. One of the other issues, and I will reverse course for a minute, there are places where there's a lot of data and it's pretty good, or at least plenty good enough. And for the Department of Defense, one of those is in the personnel management arena. Using machine learning or other techniques on the vast amount of current and past data of the behavior of uniformed military. When do they leave? How often do they leave? You know, what are the predictors, not necessarily on individuals, but on the population as a whole? What are the needed incentives so that you've got the right number of doctors staying in and not too many lawyers and all that sort of thing? That's a field which is rife for exploitation, and it's an area in which, for other reasons, we're already investing in the data curation. So those were the two thoughts I had, cyber for fast and human capital, because we have to keep the data good anyway. Those are the opportunities I had in mind.
Can I add to that? So we're actually seeing that same thing. I think personnel management and human capital management is a #1 use case for us. We thought it would probably be in the cybersecurity space, but that's a lot like saying artificial intelligence. There's so many things, we won't go down the cyber arena. But workforce analytics is really fascinating to us, and the number of agencies right now who are asking us to help them identify who's going to retire and when. There was one agency in particular, who I will not name, who helped early retire an entire group of folks. And then they realized 5 years later, that was unfortunate because they were the Russian linguists, or that, whatever it was that they happened to know. I won't necessarily, it was Russia. So then they ended up having to go out and hire a number of contractors in order to fill those roles. So it sort of backfired on them. But now they're taking this approach of, let's understand what are all the factors. And it's really fascinating. It comes down to, in many cases, they were losing a lot of folks in this one agency, not based on age and they wanted to retire. It was that they didn't have any flexibility. They weren't allowed to work from home. Their commute was too long, and or their boss. We looked at the division and we said, this division doesn't have anybody leaving, and this division does. And it ended up coming back where they were able to put in some environments and some changes that helped. And we also find in the Department of Defense, to your point, we've been able to help a group within the military understand who are the best individuals for certain special ops roles. Why spend that person's months and years of their life going through what something is that they perhaps might not be strong at? And how do we understand who are the best candidates for special operations versus wasting a lot of time and taxpayer dollars trying to go through those processes? So those are examples of current customers that we're working with today, and it is because we have troves of historical information that helps us pinpoint the best special ops person looks like X, Y, and Z, so we can better define what we're going to do in future requirements.
All right, I'm going to hit the panel with one more question, then we'll open up to audience after that. So I will get to you, I promise. I'm going to ask you to talk about our big theme, the AI ecosystem. This is something that I think came up, the idea of we should talk about an AI ecosystem at our very first session, but it didn't necessarily translate or impact on my brain until we probably got to like the 4th or 5th workshop. And it ended up becoming an overarching thing to me that connected our findings on the international competitiveness, investment, adoption, all these issues. We were able to, I think, anchor on this idea of the AI ecosystem. So you don't have to buy into that framing necessarily, but my question is, what do you think needs to happen in the AI ecosystem as we've defined it, or if you have a modification to that, feel free to highlight that, in order for the use of AI to become something really compelling for people making decisions that, yes, this is a use case I want to invest in, I want to implement in my agency, in my command, in my mission area. So where do you see, we talked about this startup debt in the ecosystem. Where do you see the critical elements of that, or would you dispute that framing?
I would say that question kind of brings me back to almost, over 4 years ago when we first started thinking about the lab, and it kind of comes to a central question with anyone, whether it's government or commercial customers that have very high consequence mission, which is what is good enough? More specifically, or put in a different way, what are you trying to do? I remember one of our first meetings, and I'll rephrase it so you can have the same sort of general confusion that the end user did too. We just released and open sourced one of our first computer vision models, and we met with a government end user, and we walked up to him and we said, what F1 score is sufficient for you with an intersection over union variable between 0.25 and 0.5? And the customer looked at us and goes, I have no idea what you're talking about. And we sat back and said, we didn't know what to say either. And the reality is all joking aside, why is that a good story? It's a good story because at the time, and even now, so much of work that is really compelling in model development is still in what one may call it's non-applied. And so if you're going to write a paper or even do early testing, you're going to want to know you're deeply involved in your metric, in this case what we were using, an F1 score. But if you're an end user, particularly in high consequence, maybe you care about that. This gets to the explainability component. But what you more care about is, does it answer my question? And the reality is that different questions require very different fidelity in models, and thus everything that's associated with that, all the way down to a data set. And so to have truly compelling examples of derivatives from machine learning models, I think that's the first place we always want to start. And we've already highlighted some examples where that's occurring. And a really good way to illustrate this is if one's just interested in general building counts after a natural disaster, and we're trying to figure out just generally what could be the level of impact, not how many exact buildings, not what was the material damaged on those buildings. Just give me a count. That problem seems fairly tractable with some error bars. If something is more higher consequence with a very, very low acceptability for error, then that's something that we have to work on. And I think perhaps one of the most exciting pieces in the next 2 to 3 years is going to be fleshing out an entire workflow for applications that have pretty good models built for them. So a really good example of this would be in some of the folks we've worked with at a couple different organizations, one including a company called Development Seed. If you look at what they're doing with humanitarian open street maps, thinking about how to integrate general projections into in this case, just tell me what the most complex tiles are to label after a disaster. It's still early days, and all that's still in the prototype stage, but as that workflow matures, that is a great use case of highlighting not only how a machine learning model is deployed, in this case all open source, but also how humans interact with it. So what's the feedback rate if the severity rating in those chips are wrong, or what if they're right? Thinking through that entire cycle, I think, will then lay the groundwork for equally compelling work in more complex scenarios where maybe the error rates or acceptability of error is lower.
Aaron?
What we're finding is the most important thing to do is just to understand at a high level that an agency needs to have senior sponsorship. They have to, when you talk about the people that are part of this equation, if you do not have senior sponsorship and you don't have the person at the highest level who is embracing the fact that you're trying to endeavor on some sort of journey with AI, you're going to fail. So you need to have that senior leadership. We spent a lot of time doing workshops just to sort of lay the groundwork that AI is the big bubble, and there's machine learning, there's deep learning, there's neural. We're going to try to focus in on what can you do in what we call supervised machine learning. How can you take something and not try to boil the ocean, but take a small subset of something you're trying to do that you really believe that you want to get the answer to. If you have that senior sponsorship, it's incredibly important. From there, having a business owner at the next level who understands the data, we're never going to take the people out of this equation. That's the most important thing. You have to have somebody who has that domain expertise and understands the data better than anybody else, and who has, their senior leader has their back. They want them to go off and try to accomplish something. And then you have your technical folks, your folks who are your data analysts. They're really strong in Tableau. They're really strong in different visualization tools, but they do not have a degree in computer science and in math and stats. Trying to find that unicorn is incredibly hard. But what you do have is you have the people with the domain expertise, then you bring in the capabilities, whatever tools it is that you're using, and it could be from the ingest side, the data management side, all the way through the consumption, where you're actually doing your visualization. But what you want to be able to accomplish, in our view, is having that senior sponsorship through your business and down to your technical level. And ultimately, when you're building out supervised machine learning models, you need to have full transparency behind that, because you need to be able to have answers to how did you get to this answer? How did you understand that this group of patients are at risk for infection in your hospital because of these factors that you developed? You need to have somebody who has that domain expertise that can read behind the algorithms and the machine learning that's created and be able to really decipher it. That helps you with your people piece, your transparency, and having that full open communication plan, I think, is really important. As well, thinking through some of your other ecosystem pieces, of course, the policies that enable it. You need to make sure that the right people have access to the information, and that the insights that they're trying to gather have the guidance behind it. We find a lot of times, especially in the intelligence community, there's this big fear that if you have a machine do everything, that there's going to be this cross-population between secret and top secret data. And so you need to make sure that the policies and the governance factor are through there. I completely support everything in your AI ecosystem, and what you've labeled out is really important. But it starts at the people level, I think, for us, and then going through the trust and the transparency with what you're creating and what you're actually going to produce as your result. And having the people tied to it is very important.
So I'm inclined to, because of the senior sponsorship, to tell a story from 20 years ago when John Hamre was Deputy Secretary of Defense and I was on loan as a science advisor to one of the T&E organizations. And I was one of the people who was the advisors on modeling and simulation, in particular for JWARS at the time, which was an attempt to include logistics in combat modeling. So we're at a meeting at the horseshoe table, and I get to sit up at the front of the table like I'm important, and these two kids come in to talk about it's a day-long meeting, but these kids to talk about the configuration control of the software. So lights go out, they talk for 20 minutes, the lights come back on, and they say, any questions? And I look around at the advisory group, and all I'm seeing is deer in the headlights. And I think to myself, I'm the only one sitting at this table that ever wrote code for a living, and I stopped doing it 10 years ago. Now, fortunately, the guy who was handling the meeting saw the same thing I did, picked up the gavel, banged it down, with no questions, we'll move on to the next speaker. But nothing that I have seen, and none of the people that I've shared this story with or asked about it, indicate that it's gotten any better. So the senior sponsorship is important, but like when the Department of Defense, we don't have a mechanism to get the people, even with my level of experience, which is now not 10 years out of date, but 30 years out of date, into these positions. And I don't see a solution, and nobody has told me one, but you need people who are informed about this in the same way they are informed about budgeting or about combat or about aviation issues. In terms of the ecosystem, which is not a natural way for me to think about this, the problem, but I thought about it in terms of American strengths historically at integration issues. And I think since we're moving into an era of, probably moving into an era of great power competition, we want to think about this ecosystem in terms of what is the nature of an ecosystem that would support artificial intelligence? What are the elements of an ecosystem that would support liberal democracies? I don't have an answer. I'm not a political scientist. You know, I do physics, I do equations. It's way easier. I don't know where we have the advantage there. I think it ought to be an intellectual international leadership role that we try to take. And I think in our own nation, in our own community, we have to encourage broader literacy, and we have to try to tighten the terminology down so that the non-experts, the adjacent experts, can actually grapple with the problems especially well. But I think a critical issue is this issue of that we want to find an ecosystem in which the liberal democracies are competitive.
But I would inject one more level of complexity, David, in your comment, which is, especially in the computer vision domain, but machine learning writ large, unlike historical analysis of the defense industrial base, if you look at a lot of the work that's occurring in the machine learning domain, so much of it, both on the tools and framework side and algorithm side, are in the open source, which is a very different environment than what we're used to dealing with historically in terms of how we think about national power and national assets. And it's something that we've thought, it comes up continuously even with the purview of our lab, in the sense of what makes sense to open source and what does not. And we continuously come back on the side of being more open simply because there's still so much early work to be done. It's hard necessarily, at least from our view, it's hard necessarily to determine where we've surpassed a foundational capability, and now it's left to go into the realm of proprietary. And I think I know both of you have to deal with that. I'm just curious your thoughts on that, or both.
Well, to go back to the international aspects, the openness is natural to our country in ways that it is not natural to others. And there may be a way in which to capitalize on that, to make that a strength rather than a weakness. But again, I'm punching above my weight class talking about international political theory.
All right, let me turn to audience questions. You've been waiting very patiently, and we do have microphones that'll be brought. Please ask one question, keep it brief, make it a question, and tell us who you are. So I see one hand here.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. I think I direct this to David. It's just a minor point, but I think you made a remark, comparing to self-driving cars where people could be hurt in an accident to the the case of AlphaGo where nobody's going to be hurt. But isn't there an argument to be made that AlphaGo is 100 times, so much more dangerous because what everybody drew from their hype over that was that, my gosh, this is how you win wars. I mean, new tactics were coming out that the Go players hadn't seen in the whole history of humanity. And of course, that's a deterministic game, but then you get the open AI people working with non-deterministic video games having very good results. So can you say something about the danger there, and maybe the openness is the danger?
So I accept your suggestion that what I was talking about was physical risk, not intellectual risk. I think there were elements of hype about it. I think Go is an intensely digital game with rules, and in fact the rules are the same on both sides, which frequently is not the case in warfare. I don't know. I work at an institute that to some extent was invented 60 years ago to counter hype. So I'm familiar with the dangers. It tends to be self-regulating over time. But yeah, I think there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm that You know, all we need, I mean, one of the comments I used to make to people was, all we need is curated data on 30 million wars, and we're ready to go. So the scale is very different. That said, it was a very powerful accomplishment, and one that was not expected even by many in the field. Shortly after it happened, my wife and I were driving out in Shenandoah, and there was some NPR thing we heard for a few minutes, but they were talking about the fact that, you know, they're talking about this as a computer beat the world's best player of Go. And that's one way to look at it, but I think the right way to look at it is 300 of the best computer scientists with unlimited budget and unlimited access to computer power, most of whom were decent Go players, were able to pool their resources and beat the best single individual at Go. And when you describe it that way, then the hype is damped out. But you made an interesting distinction between, you know, intellectual risk and physical risk that I had not made before. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come here, in the blue blazer, 3 rows up from you, Robert. There you go. Thanks.
Jennifer Zheng from the Epoch Times. I know virtually nothing about AI, and I haven't had time to read your report. But I heard Andrew mentioned that every country has a different purpose in developing AI. I heard that China is more advanced than America in this. So I wonder, what do you think is the China's purpose in developing this, and where they are now, and how is that going to impact or affect the United States? Thank you.
Well, from the work that we did in the report, I would say there was pretty extensive application of AI projected or in the strategy that China has been discussing as part of broader efforts they have towards kind of seizing the technological high ground in a range of industries. And so AI sort of complements or supports their efforts along a number of dimensions in the plan, you know, made in China 2025 is one of the documents that describes that. There are others as well. So where I would say there's tremendous strength there is that they have invested in a number of institutes focused on AI. They have recruited heavily an AI workforce. Some of it, folks who've come to study in the United States have gone back to China, have been recruited back. Others generated right there in China. They produce literally hundreds of thousands of engineers every year out of their graduate schools and universities. So they have some real advantages there. They have advantages in the quantity of data that they gather through constant surveillance of the population. And there are very low limits to aggregating and sharing and exploiting that data that we don't have here. So there's real strengths there. One element that I think can be sometimes overblown is the amount of money they're putting into it. The truth is we don't really know the amount of money. There is this $300 billion, $150 billion figure that's out there. That's a multi-year number, and it's a projection of the size of the AI industry that is their goal to achieve. So it's a little less clear exactly how much in terms of real currency is being invested in AI, but there's little doubt that it's substantial and that it's at least comparable to our investment and perhaps stronger. The way we kind of came down in thinking about it was to focus less on specific dollar investments and more on the health of the ecosystem, because our view is that what may be applicable at doing facial recognition at airports, allowing them to monitor people in the population, that problem may not be at all or equally applicable to other warfare applications that we would consider more important in a battlefield scenario. So it's not clear that there's a transferable advantage from one to the other. But we do think there's a transferable advantage to having a really robust AI ecosystem that you can apply people and infrastructure and policy to multiple different kinds of problems and carry over some advantage there. I still think that Silicon Valley represents the most robust AI ecosystem that we see today. That's a good and important advantage for the United States. It's a perishable advantage, and so it's not to be sat upon. Are there other thoughts on the panel on that?
I have one thought, which is most of these companies think of themselves as international companies. I'm not sure Silicon Valley is American. So it's located here. That confers some advantages, but it is striking to me that the Google employees seem much more squeamish about Project Maven than they do about the massive surveillance state that's growing up in China. Well, is that ecosystem on our side? Not immediately apparent to me.
Other questions here in the middle?
Thank you. And Chris Bidwell, Federation of American Scientists. Kind of a segue to your last comment, Dr. David. With regards to artificial intelligence and national security, the talent acquisition problem, how is that being addressed when the technology is not born secret, as many of the other programs, and yet government contracting doesn't account for the fact that the salaries that are being paid in Silicon Valley are outrageously high by at least some of them are for top talent. I have this both from a recent New York Times article and discussions with a venture capitalist well known in the Valley. How are we going to switch that, especially in light of the problems with like with Google and Project Minerva, switch that to bring that talent into the national security arena? Thank you. Sorry, it's a long question.
So at DataRobot, we see this challenge all of the time, and I would agree that Silicon Valley, we are in jeopardy there because there is a massive push from China to gather as much information as they possibly can from whether they're getting our technologies or having their folks, like you said, study in this country and then go back. One of the things that we're looking at is the fact that it is possible, it's not that far-fetched, the idea of making and creating an environment of citizen data scientists. I'm not a data scientist. I work with four of the #1 data scientists in the world work at DataRobot. We're about a company of 500 people. We are the ones who are trying to hire those folks, just like Google is, just like Amazon and Facebook. But the idea behind it is that you shouldn't make the technology as one piece of the whole ecosystem. You shouldn't make it so difficult that people like you and I, who are not data scientists, can't leverage the benefits from it. So you want to be able to have that area, like I said, it's a unicorn where data scientists are so hard to get and they're so expensive to get. They're especially not going to be hired in the federal government because they can get much higher salaries in commercial. So what we're trying to do is create an environment of citizen data scientists where you have the domain expertise. You understand your data better than anybody, but you don't need to have the computer science background and the math and stats background as part of the ability to get really actionable intelligence from your data. So if you think about it now, the way you're operating with the internet every day, you're on your phone, you're not a trained expert in coding. You didn't need to know computer science in order to log into your social media account this morning. That same idea and that same movement is happening within this environment of artificial intelligence. We need to make the tools and the capability and this entire ecosystem much more easier to understand through education and the ability for all of us who have the understanding of our data to be able to gather the information and turn out actionable intelligence from it without having to have these massive degrees and these very expensive people within your workforce. So we call it a citizen data scientist, just bringing the power down to the common people, if you will.
Yeah, and to extend that thought, think about capabilities on a spectrum, and Aaron highlights it very well, is if the intent is for the U.S. government to be hiring individuals who want to build foundational networks from the ground up, then yes, that is a monumental task for anybody, it doesn't matter what organization. But what's been particularly compelling for us both to invest in as well as participate in open source as well as just experience from other partners is that the evolution of tools has been drastic just in the last couple of years. DataRobot's a great example of this. A step further back, not fully a product, but what we have seen is tools that are entry level that help end users who are perhaps not skilled or not familiar with building out their own models, but still learn how to work with a model. Like a great example of this is if you were to look online at what AWS calls SageMaker. It's just one example of a cloud service offering, But essentially, these are tools that allow end users to quickly spin up a model and look at some results. Now, it does require some scripting skills, but it is something that we've seen government end users start to work with pretty aggressively. This is compelling because, to Aaron's point, it starts increasing that literacy drastically. I mean, when we started in Cosmic, none of us, except for one, was actually a geospatial expert. And the reason I bring that up is we started where everyone else started, looking at OpenCV. This was before TensorFlow was open source. And we learned through experimentation. And I think what's so great about a lot of these new tools is that and the reason we contribute and others contribute to open source is it allows for those tools to be more robust and for entry-level people or folks who are just interested in learning more to start with experimentation and thus then become maybe a stronger end user of a tool like DataRobot or maybe build their own model as they have greater familiarity.
So one of my colleagues who actually comes out of the machine learning business and spent some time in the Pentagon while the JAIC, the Joint Advanced Intelligence Center, was being set up, basically came back and said, everybody's worried about how are you going to get the very best AI people in the JAIC. He said, we don't need the best. Second tier is plenty good enough. They need the best contracting officers and the best lawyers in the JAIC. And this fits into my mantra, which as a physical scientist I have to keep reminding myself of. The United States government is primarily a resource allocation organization. When you think of its role in the ecosystem, that's a big part of it. And that's contracting and law and ethics and those things. And I think that's an element of the ecosystem that's worth bearing in mind. It goes to the point that you don't need your government users to be power users. So I think there's an element there in terms of building the ecosystem about which pieces of it the government needs to be the best at and which pieces they can be good enough at, because you're not going to be able to be the best at everything.
I would just add to that from the perspective of our report, and to tie it to Dave's earlier comment about, Silicon Valley may be the robust Silicon AI ecosystem, but it's a private sector entity and it doesn't necessarily report to any nation per se. That's true. That's one reason why in the report we talk about the government needing an AI ecosystem that is organic, not to compete with or to outstrip Silicon Valley by any stretch of the imagination, but enough of one to be an intelligent user, to push forward military critical applications, to work with those in industry who are willing to take on the burden of security and the threshold of trust and explainability to do the kinds of high consequence work the government needs. I will say from our perspective here at CSIS, we do have a data team that works for me and the Defense Industrial Initiatives Group. We do a lot of work on contract data, trying to draw policy conclusions, implications from that. And we have seen in the last really 2 years, I would say, a dramatic increase in the availability of young people coming out of college or coming out of graduate programs with really significant, serious data analytic skills. So the academic world is out there. They're responding to the call, and from what I've seen, that there's a pretty robust market for those folks out there in the private sector. So there is some room for hope. I'm going to make room for one last question, and then we'll have to stop. So I always like to balance the room. So let me head on to the right side. I haven't touched yet.
I'm Drew Calcagno from USDI. I was having a question about ethics. So given the background and the backdrop of a number of different private sector companies kind of leading the way on a lot of ethics writing, I think of DeepMind having their own group dedicated specifically for that. What do you think are some of the main ethics AI principles for the national security community, specifically the DoD?
I'm going to dodge your question. There was a reference to the National AI R&D Strategy It actually turns out that while you were putting this report together, they actually put out a request for comments on an update which is underway, which was just closed a week or so ago. But one of our remarks was that this area particularly was one that required additional attention and an even greater U.S. focus for international leadership. I would tie it back to the values of what we describe as those of the liberal democracies. I think we need to run our country and prevail as needed on that basis.
Just one thing to add on that is just the model sensitivity and model bias is something that, regardless of the application, is a critical issue for any development or end user team. Just even in the geospatial domain, one thing that we have to think a lot about is just how do we, whether it's internal work or work in collaboration with our partners through SpaceNet, how do we incorporate enough geospatial diversity that we, or the models that are released, can operate in different domains. It's a really niche example, but arguably that example could translate to a variety of applications. And it's something that as data sets grow, whether they be open source or in-house, or as algorithms become increasingly benchmarked, that's an important factor that should always be kept in mind, whether it's for all the way to data generation, all the way to the deployment of an end-use application.
From a DataRobot perspective, we look at it the same way, and one of the reasons that's so important is that when you look at the models and the transparency behind that and being able to see how the result was provided. So for instance, we could tell you in this jurisdiction of Ohio, the opioid crisis looks like it will cause X amount of deaths next year. And they ask you, why is that? We're not limiting it to just one model. Our platform allows for whether it's TensorFlow by Google, Valpal Rabbit, R, Python, it doesn't really matter. And so what you really want to be able to understand is that your data scientist community and the folks who are building out platforms like DataRobot are looking at it as you still own your data and you have to have the understanding of what it is that you're providing to the system to go off and build models to. But being able to have it not limited, we had a CIO for one of the intelligence agencies say, you all are a lot like Switzerland. You don't go out and pick a particular model because you're the company who developed that model. TensorFlow is developed by Google, but we have that inside of our platform. So when we turn out our models, we're spinning up hundreds of models and sometimes thousands of combinations of models, which are ensemble models. And then you can open up the blueprint, which is complete transparency behind every step in the process so that you can see what's happened. As far as the ethics and the governance behind that, that's really very dependent on the organization that you're working with and the experts in the data field there. So if you look at tools like ours, whatever you provide the system to develop and to have the models built from is something that your organization hopefully has vetted out and has approved before we're turning out a result for you. And at the end, your data scientist or your senior executive or whoever it might be needs to look at the data result and the intelligence that we provided to say yes or no, good or bad to that answer.
I guess I would just add to that, we have a lot of ethical policy that we already have. So, we have rules of engagement in the military context. We have requirements that our personnel system generate outcomes relating to diversity or non-bias across a range of dimensions. And so we have a lot of ethical policy in place across national security world. The question to me is, how do you translate that into something that the machine can meaningfully comply with? Comply with is probably not the right word, but can meaningfully address. And we, in many ways, right now, are challenged to measure and say, is this algorithmic output complying with our ethical policies? Well, we got to do some translation. What does that mean in the context of what that algorithm is actually being tasked to do, and what that machine intelligence is being tasked to do. I think it's addressed a little bit, by the way, in that other report I mentioned on the National Strategy for AI that came out of our Strategic Technology Program. I'd ask you to look there. But this is really one of the central challenges, and it's not so much a lack of ethical policy or guidance as is how do we translate that into something that the machine intelligence can meaningfully address. And then to the point that I think David has really brought home for me on a couple of occasions, if we don't know how the AI is doing what it's doing, or we aren't able to say if we see one outcome in one instance, can we assume that with the exact same inputs in 2 months' time as that algorithm has learned and evolved, it will even do the same thing? There's a huge theoretical fundamental challenge to benchmarking and measuring a learning algorithm that we need to do some work on. So I think we're going to have to stop there. I want to really thank our audience for sticking with us for a long but hopefully interesting discussion. I really enjoyed the discussion, especially with the panel. I want to commend you to, if you didn't get a hard copy or if you're watching online, our report, which is available on the website. You can download it electronically. It'll look just like this, or you can order one for yourself. We have the video that we showed on our website. I should have mentioned that there is a second video. So we did an earlier video in this project that was released a couple months ago that is more of an introduction to the concept, and then the video you saw today, which really summarizes the work of our report. I want to thank Thales again for making the project possible, and Alan for joining us this morning. And please join me in thanking our panel for a great discussion.